"Where's my son?" The cry shattered the stillness of the small town. Jonathan, a tall man with a weary face, burst into the empty nursery. The bed was neatly made, toys lined the shelf, but the boy was gone. The window stood slightly ajar, faint traces of bare feet marking the sill. Jonathan's heart plummeted. His son, Michael, had vanished. Strangest of all, the door was locked from the inside. How could he have left? That night, the town sprang to life. Neighbors wielded flashlights, police scoured the park, and Jonathan darted between streets, shouting Michael's name. But the boy seemed to have melted into the darkness. "How can I go on after this?" he asked himself, despair clawing at his insides. The walls of his house seemed to soak up his anguish. And yet there was something else, a creeping sense that unseen eyes were watching him. The next morning, the police delivered words that stabbed like a blade. Maybe he left on his own. It happens. Jonathan didn't buy it. Michael never acted without reason. A cold glint flickered in the sheriff's eyes as he spoke, as if he knew more than he let on. Jonathan swore to himself he would uncover the truth, no matter how far he had to go. To understand his resolve, we must step back. Jonathan was an ordinary man, a mechanic in a small garage, always carrying the scent of oil and steel. His wife had walked out 3 years ago, leaving only a curt note, "I can't do this anymore." Since then, Michael had been his anchor, his light. The boy was quiet, fond of books and collecting dinosaur figurines. Every night, Jonathan tucked him in and whispered, "You're my hero, son." Michael's smile, the one that made life worth living, would light up his face. But in recent months, Jonathan had noticed something unsettling. At night, Michael would rise and stare out the window, his eyes vacant, as if drawn to something no one else could see. "What's out there, Michael?" Jonathan asked once. "They're calling me," the boy murmured. A chill ran through Jonathan. Who's calling? He wanted to ask, but Michael had already turned away. The next morning, the boy remembered nothing. Yet the pattern persisted. The window was increasingly left ajar, as if Michael had risen in the night. But where could he have gone? Whispers spread through the town. This wasn't the first disappearance. Over the years, several children had vanished in the same way, silently, at night, as if by their own choice. The police always said, "Kids run away. It's their decision." But the parents knew their children wouldn't just leave. One evening, alone, Jonathan found a scrap of paper under Michael's bed. In uneven, childish handwriting, it read, "I have to go to them. They promised we'd be together." His blood turned to ice. Who were they, and where was he meant to go? He clutched the note to his chest, eyes squeezed shut. There was no doubt now. Michael hadn't simply disappeared. Someone or something had taken him. But who? Just as Jonathan resolved to investigate, a soft knock sounded at the door. Slow, cautious, as if meant to warn rather than alarm. He opened it. Standing there was the last person he expected that night. An old man loomed in the doorway. His name was Mr. Harper, though the townsfolk called him the oddball from the outskirts. Tall and stooped, with thick gray brows and a gaze that pierced like a blade. "You're looking for your boy," he said without preamble. Jonathan froze. How could he know? No one had spoken of the disappearance aloud, but Harper's eyes held no uncertainty. "I've seen him, and the others," Harper said, staring past Jonathan into the shadows. "They go at night toward the forest." "What are you talking about?" snapped, but dread stirred within him. Michael had often gazed in that direction. Harper stepped closer, his voice dropping to a whisper. "Be careful. They don't just leave. They're led. You'll hear the singing soon. When you do, run or lose everything." Before Jonathan could respond, the old man vanished into the night. He shut the door and leaned against the wall, struggling to breathe. His hands trembled. "Singing," he thought. "What madness is this?" But deep down, he knew these weren't just the ramblings of an old man. That same night, Jonathan woke to a sound, faint, almost imperceptible, like a lullaby. But it wasn't soothing. It was eerie, unsettling. It drifted from beyond the window. He leapt up and peered outside. The street was empty, cloaked in spreading fog. Yet his heart pounded as if something had rapped against his chest. Then it hit him. Harper's warning was no coincidence. At dawn, Jonathan went to the garage. He couldn't work, his hands shook too much, but staying home was unbearable. His friend and co-worker, Tom, noticed. "You look like death," Tom said, wiping oil from his hands. "What's wrong?" Jonathan meant to stay silent, but the words spilled out. "Michael's gone." Tom dropped his wrench. "No, John, not this. You know it's not the first time. And the police." "The police are useless," Jonathan cut in, his voice cracking. Silence fell over the garage. "I'll find him myself." Tom's gaze grew heavy. "You need to know, all those kids, they left at night, and none ever came back. Not one." The words sliced through Jonathan's mind like a blade, but he only clenched his fists tighter. That evening, he returned home. In Michael's room, he noticed something he'd missed before. Beneath the blanket, strange symbols were scrawled on the wall, drawn by a child's hand, yet precise, almost ceremonial. Circles with small crosses inside, forming a chain toward the window. "What did you see, son?" Jonathan whispered, tracing the marks. Then he heard the floorboards creak. Someone was in the house. He froze, listening. Slow footsteps echoed in the hallway. Grabbing a flashlight, his pulse thundered in his temples. But when he flung open the door, the corridor was empty. Only a whisper remained, as if children's voices had breathed his name. Jonathan. He nearly dropped the flashlight. For the first time in years, true fear gripped him. He was in this now, and there was no turning back. The night stretched on. Jonathan sat in Michael's room, too afraid to close his eyes. The flashlight lay beside him, its batteries fading, the beam flickering as if caught between worlds. Around 3 in the morning, the singing returned, drifting from the forest beyond the town. It was haunting, alien, yet mesmerizing, as if the night itself exhaled the melody. Jonathan rose and peered out the window. His heart stopped. 3 children walked down the street, barefoot, in pajamas, moving toward the forest in lockstep, as if guided by an unseen hand. "Stop!" he shouted. He threw open the door, raced down the stairs, and burst onto the street. But when he reached the road, the children were gone. Only thick, damp fog blanketed everything. He stood, gasping for breath, his hands trembling. Where did they go? I saw them. His thoughts spiraled, fear spreading like an ink stain. Back home, he noticed something new. On Michael's windowsill lay a torn page from a children's book, one that hadn't been there before. It showed children walking a path into a dark forest. Beneath the image, words read, "The night calls, and they answer." Jonathan pressed the page to his chest. This was no mere disappearance. Something far darker was at play. And Michael was out there among those shadows. In the morning, Jonathan sought out Mr. Harper. The old man lived on the town's edge, in a weathered, ivy-covered house. The door swung open before Jonathan could knock. "I knew you'd come," Harper said, his eyes alight with an unsettling fire. "You knew about this, the children, their vanishings. Tell me where my son is." Harper paused, then spoke slowly. "Your boy isn't lost yet, but he hears their call like the others before him. They go where the song leads, into the forest, to the old lake." "What call? What lake?" Jonathan's voice trembled. Harper retrieved a tattered notebook from a shelf. Its pages bore the same symbols as Michael's room: circles, crosses, lines. "I've tracked this for 20 years, he said. "Every time a child vanishes, these marks appear in their room. And it's always the same song. First, the children hear it, then the parents." "Why? Who's behind this?" Harper's gaze lingered. "It's not human. It's old, ancient. It comes with the fog and claims those who listen." Jonathan wanted to argue, but the words caught in his throat. The past few nights had woven a chilling pattern. "What do I do?" he asked at last. Harper's smile was grim, joyless. "You must go there yourself. But heed this. If you hear the singing, cover your ears, and never look them in the eyes." He handed Jonathan a small copper amulet.
It won't shield you entirely, but it'll buy you time." Jonathan gripped the amulet, his heart pounding. Fear mingled with resolve. To save his son, he would have to step into the darkness. Twilight fell swiftly, as if a heavy shroud had draped the earth. Jonathan stood at the forest's edge, clutching the amulet in his pocket. His footsteps sank into the damp earth, the word Michael pulsing in his chest. The forest felt alive. Branches creaked like brittle bones, and a distant owl's hoot was swallowed by another sound, the singing. It wasn't loud, but it chilled him to the core, resonating not in the air, but in his mind. "Don't listen," muttered he, tightening his grip on the amulet. The path drew him deeper. Shadows between the trees seemed to shift too quickly. Something flickered at the corner of his eye, but when he turned, only thick fog remained. Harper's words echoed. Don't look them in the eyes. That warning terrified him most. What would happen if he did? After half an hour, Jonathan reached a clearing. There, amid tall grass, stood children, 10, maybe more, barefoot, in pajamas, their faces blank. They moved in slow unison, as if tethered by an invisible thread. Michael led them, his eyes open but lifeless. "Michael!" Jonathan's cry tore from his throat. His son didn't turn. None of the children stirred. They marched toward the dark line of trees beyond the clearing. Jonathan lunged forward, but froze, sensing a presence behind him. A shiver raced down his spine. He turned slowly. A silhouette loomed, tall, unnaturally elongated, woven from the fog itself. No face, only two deep hollows oozing darkness. The singing grew louder, emanating not from the forest, but from this entity.
Jonathan stumbled back, his heart hammering. The creature didn't move, but its misty form rippled as if breathing. "Give me my son!" he shouted, though his voice faltered to a whisper. The singing shifted, rising sharper, like a taut string snapping. The children paused for a heartbeat, then resumed their march, heedless of their father's plea. Jonathan raised the amulet, its copper trembling in his hand. As he aimed it at the creature, the singing faltered for a moment. The entity stirred, retreating slightly. He stepped forward. "I'm not leaving without him." The darkness around the creature pulsed, and a thin, impossibly long hand emerged, its branch-like fingers grazing the ground. The grass blackened instantly, as if scorched. "Don't look them in the eyes," Harper's warning rang out. Too late. Jonathan looked. He froze. In the creature's hollow sockets, he saw himself. Not as he was, but old, broken, a man who'd lost his son forever. "No," he gasped. The entity drew closer, and a low, alien voice sliced through the fog. "You hear us already. Soon you'll follow." Jonathan clapped his hands over his ears, but the voice was inside, spreading like venom. He sank to his knees, clutching the amulet until it bit into his skin. The world spun, the ground swaying beneath him. Only one thing anchored him: Michael's face, fading into the forest's depths. "I won't lose him, never," he vowed. With a surge of will, he staggered forward, chasing the children into the fog. Jonathan ran along the forest path, his boots sinking into the muck, his breath ragged. The singing enveloped him, thick as the fog, pulling him toward an abyss. Minutes later, a lake emerged before him, its black waters barely reflecting the moon. The fog above swirled, forming ghostly shapes. Jonathan halted at the edge, listening. The children stood around the lake, their vacant gazes fixed on its center. Something horrific shimmered in the water, a reflection both childlike and ancient, faces twisted with shared agony. Michael stood among them, reaching for the surface, oblivious to the danger. "Michael!" Jonathan roared. His son didn't respond, drawn to a call stronger than his father's voice. Panic seized Jonathan. This place was alive, the lake itself breathing, luring all who approached. "Don't look them in the eyes," Harper's words resounded, but it was too late. The children's empty gazes met his, chilling him to the bone. Their eyes held no fear, no anger, just expectation. A whisper slithered into his mind: "Join us or lose him forever." Jonathan collapsed to his knees, clutching the amulet as cold seeped into his bones. The fog thickened, the lake's surface rippling, distorting the moon's reflection. The children stepped toward the water, unyielding. "No!" Jonathan screamed, lunging for Michael. He seized his son's hand, and for a moment all seemed right. But the water quaked, and a figure rose from its depths, indescribable, with slime-coated arms and hollows where eyes should be. Michael moaned, as if touched by the entity, and Jonathan realized this was no mere physical threat. It sought his soul. He thrust the amulet skyward. Its metal glowed, faintly, warmly. The creature halted. The singing grew shrill, as if the forest itself rebelled. Don't look in their eyes," his mind screamed. Jonathan shut his eyes, pressed the amulet to his chest, and stepped forward, pulling Michael with him. A miracle unfolded. The children froze, as if a spell had broken. The fog thinned, the figure in the water vanished. Michael turned, his face breaking into a genuine smile. "Dad," he whispered. "I'm here, son, always.
Jonathan replied, tears streaming down his face. But the forest still breathed, warning that their escape was incomplete. Something ancient lingered in the fog, ready to test them again. Morning crept in, dim light piercing the heavy mist. Jonathan held Michael's hand, each step home feeling like a triumph. His heart raced, his thoughts tangled. What was that? The lake, the singing, the fog. It felt like a fever dream, yet the marks on their skin and memories proved it real. Near the house, Jonathan noticed a fresh scratch on the door, as if something had tried to claw its way in. He tightened his grip on Michael's shoulders. "Did you see that?" he asked, shielding his son from fear. Michael only shook his head, staring wide-eyed at the door. Inside, everything was as they'd left it, but the shadows seemed longer, stranger. A new inscription marred the wall, scratched by childish nails. "You heard the call, but it hasn't left." Cold gripped Jonathan's chest. The danger wasn't just in the forest. It had invaded their home. They'd survived the first strike, but the enemy still watched. The closer they came to normalcy, the clearer it became. The fight wasn't over. At the garage, Jonathan looked drained. His co-workers whispered, and Tom noticed he could barely stand. "You look like a ghost, man. What happened?" Tom asked quietly. "We're back, but not entirely," Jonathan said, his eyes glistening. He couldn't explain the lake, the singing, the faceless entity. Who would believe him? That evening, he returned to comfort Michael. The boy played quietly with his dinosaurs, but his gaze was distant again. Jonathan saw a shadow in the corner quiver, as if watching. "It's okay, son," he said, forcing a smile. Michael nodded, but the house's silence grew heavy.
Harper's words echoed. "If you hear the singing, cover your ears." Jonathan made it their rule. But then a faint, childish hum drifted from the next room. Michael flinched. Jonathan grabbed his hand, realizing the singing wasn't just a call, it was a test. As long as they lived, as long as they held fast, they could prevail. But one question lingered. How many more nights must they endure to break this chain for good? Night fell again, but Jonathan no longer trembled. He stood at the forest's edge, holding Michael's hand, his mind sharp despite his racing heart. It was time to end this. The fog swirled, the singing deeper now, rising from the earth itself. The children stood in the clearing, ghostly and vacant, but Jonathan noticed their movements were sluggish, as if bending to his will. "Hold tight, Michael," he whispered. "We'll face this together." He raised the amulet, its copper light cutting through the fog, glinting in the children's eyes. A figure emerged from the forest's shadows, taller than he'd imagined, with an empty face, long arms, and breath like mist. The singing turned harsh, piercing.
Jonathan covered his ears, but the amulet burned warm, its power growing with each step. He advanced into the clearing, and the children moved with him, as if the amulet set their rhythm. Michael reached for his father, trusting completely. "You're not taking us," Jonathan whispered, resolve surging. The entity drew near, its hands trailing the ground, black lake water rising in misty tendrils. The singing invaded his mind, sowing doubt, unraveling control. But he held firm. Gripping the amulet, he stepped toward the creature. Its copper glow bathed Michael's face, and the boy smiled. "You're my dad!" he cried, his words shattering the darkness. The entity recoiled, dissolving into the fog. The children froze, staring at Jonathan. He took another step and scooped Michael into his arms. The amulet dimmed, but its warmth lingered. The singing ceased, the fog lifted. The forest was no longer a foe. Michael clung to his father, and Jonathan felt relief for the first time in countless nights. Danger still lurked in the shadows, but they'd won this round. Then he saw it, a mark on a tree, the same symbols from Michael's room. A warning. "We did it," Jonathan said, holding his son close. Yet unease gnawed at him. The game wasn't over. Morning broke clear, though the air still carried a faint whiff of fog. Jonathan led Michael back to town, each step cautious, every glance scanning the forest. They'd returned home, but the forest hadn't forgotten them. The house was quiet. Michael was himself again, playing, laughing, asking endless questions. Jonathan answered each, hiding the fear in his voice. But he sensed this was merely a lull before the next trial. He studied the amulet, now dull, its power spent. Yet its weight held meaning. Victory wasn't about vanquishing the darkness entirely, but standing against it to protect those he loved. The strange symbols lingered on Michael's wall, faint in the morning sun's glow, a reminder of the world's unseen forces. Though Jonathan had triumphed that night, the forest, the singing, and the darkness waited in the shadows. He pulled Michael close, breathing in his scent, and whispered, "We're stronger than fear, Michael. We'll always be together." Michael smiled, but a flicker in Jonathan's eyes betrayed his understanding. This wasn't the end. New nights might bring new trials. One truth stood clear: love, resolve, and belief in themselves were their only weapons against the dark. He glanced at the forest. Fog gathered on the horizon, as if something watched. Their story, Jonathan realized, was only beginning. "We survived," he whispered, "but the forest still waits." And so, the tale leaves us with a question. Will father and son find the courage to face the next song?